Hello and welcome to Ideas Live. I'm Karen Anderson and this is my co-host
Anne-Marie Oomen.
We are continuing our conversation on the topic of gender, which has become, it seems, a more complex and nuanced reality in our world in recent years. I don't doubt that many people don't think it's been so recent, especially those that are waiting for change. But to many of us, a lot's been happening, and we're trying to catch up with it.
We are indeed.
So this time we're going to be talking about transgender and some of what that means and who the people are who are involved in this process and in these changes. So
I'm just curious, when did you first become aware of that term, and how did it start to come to you?
Well, who was that famous public figure? Christine Jorgensen?
Mm-hmm.
That was, when it was kind of just celebrity knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a whole different thing when people personally are saying, things are changing for me, or maybe, I'm letting you know that things have always been different than you might assume about me.
Right.
But one piece of good news before we get into that piece of it, I heard a story on NPR just recently about how acceptance of gays and lesbians has increased dramatically in the last 30 years. Just since 1988, when 13% of Americans were comfortable and accepting, and 30 years later, 68% are comfortable and accepting. And I mean, that's phenomenal in 30 years that we would see this change.
I suppose if you're inside it, though, that seems like a long time.
I know. I know. I was told that when I made that comment.
But it still is a movement in the right direction.
It is.
Yes.
It is. And then they added at the end of the program, or the story, that the same kind of acceptance, understanding and awareness and acceptance is happening related to transgender people.
Mm-hmm.
So that was also very hopeful. And so, what was your earliest experience of a transgender reality?
A student of mine at Interlochen asked me to refer to themselves in the plural pronoun.
Ah.
And I was utterly taken aback.
Recently?
This was probably 8 or 10 years ago.
Wow.
I was still teaching. And I was taken aback, and I said, why? That's incorrect grammar.
Right.
And of course, the student was quick to point out that it was in fact not incorrect grammar because they, them, has been used in certain circumstances. And I said, yes, in certain circumstances. And so we had a little tit for tat back and forth. And in the end, I decided I'd better find out more about this. So I went to the counselors, who were way ahead of me, of course, on this. And they explained what was going on. And once I understood it, I said, okay, I'll buy into that. That's perfectly fine. But I'm going to have to practice.
Yes, exactly.
It's going to be hard because this is a lifetime. This is 50 years of experience of referring based on visual cues, which are not always secure. I know that, but that means that none of those cues are appropriate anymore, and that's contradicting a lifetime of experience.
I know, and you grow up thinking there are two genders.
Right.
I mean, at least in the very early years in our generation. And now it seems that the choices are expanding and expanding.
Yeah. And now I feel like I really need to pay attention and educate myself as a writer and a thinker and a friend. I need to know a whole lot more about this whole world of what does it mean when we finally acknowledge what I think is a truth, that gender, sexuality, gender and identity are all fluid, and not just fluid in a binary, non-binary sense. I hope I'm using that term correctly. but just generally over a lifetime, also
Yes.
fluid.
Yes.
And that's all interesting to me, and I want to learn how to enter that conversation with more sure-footedness.
I know, and I want to say up front that I have a lot of ignorance on this topic and awkwardness, and I know that I haven't got the language quite right or the terminology quite right, and I just. But I'm working on it, so that's part of why we're having this conversation and why we brought two people to us who know a lot more than we do.
Who are so lovely and open and willing to help us.
Lend a hand.
Yeah.
So we're going to bring our guests in next, so please stay with us. Hello, and welcome back to Ideas Live. We have a conversation about transgender today, and our two guests are actually two people who have been with us before, Elon and Jonny Cameron. But when they were with us before, it was about 4 years ago, and they were Elon and Jen Cameron. And they were here to talk about being a lesbian couple in Traverse City and what that was like for them. And they were so open and so informative that it was a really great show, and we were so grateful for you to be willing to share that information. Well, now, we fast forward 4 years, and I was mentioning to them that I was looking for someone who was a transgender person to interview, to follow up on a program we had done previously, but I didn't know someone personally, and Jonny said, "Yes, you do."
I think the response was something like, "Great news."
Yeah.
This is going to be an easy,
do know
easy
someone.
fix. Yeah.
Right. It was wonderful. And so it turns out that Jonny has been in transition for a while now.
Truly, yes.
And so we're going to talk about your particular personal story. But before we do that, Anne-Marie and I thought maybe some of the terminology that seems to proliferate should be parsed out so that we can all be talking and meaning the same things. So,
Yeah, it seems like there's so much language around this issue now, and it's new language for so many of us, or it's language that in and of itself is in transition because it's taking on more broader meanings or more fluid meanings. And so, yeah, I'm not even sure where to start, but
well, basically, how about just the term transgender? So what does that mean?
I think it's really important that we, just like when we talk about someone who identifies with their gender assigned at birth as a cisgender person, when we talk about a transgender person, we're talking about a person. And I think that often the language erases the humanity of people, especially when we start getting into identity politics. And I think it's important to always kind of ground that and root that in the fact that we're talking about people and humans. And I think that that's a place to start.
It's the place to start, and it's just the place to continue. I mean, what I'm learning about this is that it's language and mindfulness. And it's having, so like, as we get into these words and are like, what does this mean? It's an imperfect system, right? This putting words to describe our humanity and who we are. And we're just trying to find shared meaning. And so we're going to get it wrong. I'm going to misspeak. And I think that a lot of the practice for me, and when I'm talking with people and introducing my pronoun, it's making sure that we have the grace with ourselves and that we have the grace with our that we have grace with ourselves and that we have grace and generosity with those that we're speaking with, and that we, we're going to get it wrong. We're butting up against perfectionism in some ways. So.
And so much is changing. It's okay if we're not up to speed because the speed, we have a variable speed here, and we have a lot of moving parts. So transgender then is someone who does not identify with the gender they
were assigned
at birth.
Yep.
And so they can choose many different ways to embrace that identity.
And to express it to others. Is that correct?
Correct.
So how does that work then? If what are some of the options then?
Okay, yes, sure. Well, I mean, and this weaves into, I'll use my personal experience. We were on the show under the guise of being a lesbian couple, a same-sex
that's right.
couple.
Yes.
But that was never an identifier that really resonated with me. It was good.
Even then.
Oh,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
And it was good shorthand with the community and the family of people that I was with at the time, because we did have a lot of similarities in the construction of, how I felt in my body at the time, and how, who I was dating and who I was not playing softball with. But, and, other identifiers were, when I came out as bisexual, right?
I see.
Because I was dating the person, not the parts.
Right, right.
Yeah.
That's a great way to say it. I was dating, or I was loving, or I'm friends with the person, not the
have
parts.
affection for.
Yeah.
And now this younger generation, right? Because language is this living, breathing thing where we're trying to seek shared meaning and community. Pansexual is one that's coming up a little more. That seems a little more, it's not in the binary. So how cool is this? We're just going to weave through these definitions. And
Pansexual is someone whose identity is fluid then, in constant fluidity?
they're who they feel affectionate with, and I guess if sexual is in there, then, that's implied. But pansexual would be what I kind of said with regards to bisexual. It's the person, not the parts.
Right.
And so for pan, it's just going another step further and saying, hey, we don't recognize that gender is necessarily binary. It's not male or female. And that's really what's going on, is it's like, it's a system of binary, and we're reclaiming our humanity by getting nuanced and understanding
So
that
there's a continuum?
it's a continuum, it's a spectrum of gender identity and of sexuality or affection. And, some of us move along this spectrum all of our lives, and sometimes we move over this way, and some of us are fixed.
Yeah.
And some of us are like, no, I'm really fixed, And so, yeah, when we, when we start to think,
as
Right?
society becomes more aware of and accepting of this continuum, of the fact that there will be more and more people who are willing to acknowledge that that is their reality. I mean, most of us have only had the two choices when we were growing up. Kind of.
Yeah.
And so all this is evolving, and I would suspect then that more and more people will have the courage to examine their own experience and say, this part of this makes sense to me. This sort of reflects.
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's really
So
true.
you've mentioned.
And I think that's true in what we're seeing in the young people, the people we know who are raising children nowadays. We have several friends, even in our small community here, who are raising transgender kids. And I think that the times are changing in this manner. There's a lot more freedom of expression when it comes to individual identity, and there's a lot more freedom of exploration and understanding around what it is to have an identity.
Yeah, I think that the whole idea that identity itself is a malleable, it's like clay, is coming more and more to the surface, and this is all associated with that, but not just with that. I mean, it's larger things too, other things too.
You were talking about words changing their meanings. Queer is a word that has changed its meanings. Can you comment on that? I mean, that was a no-no word for a while.
And I think it's so much one of those, that idea of like every tool is a weapon if you hold it in the right way, right? So I think when it's used by people in the community, it's used because of its inclusivity. Because we don't have to parse out, okay, well, the gay cisgender people are over here, and then it's an inclusive term, which is really friendly and warm. It's like
And
family.
Whom does it include?
It includes the entirety of the LGBTQIA spectrum. And we just, we can keep adding letters until we don't need letters anymore.
Yeah.
It's an aspect of
Till you have the whole
humanity.
alphabet.
Right.
Pretty much.
Well, and
Including M and F. I mean, maybe
Right,
we're
and
all
so-
in the...
We are. I mean, that's
And I think those are some of the questions that feminists were asking in the 70s. These are
That's
things
right.
that people have been chipping away at the gender binary in different ways for millennia, because there's so many of us who don't fit within it. Even women, whatever that definition term means, right?
Right.
I mean, thank goodness, corsets are a thing of the past. But I mean, it's just
Spanx
about.
would have you believe
Well,
otherwise.
true. But yeah.
Do you want to talk about the underwear of the 60s? I would participate in that.
That's another show. I actually have a lot to say about that.
Maybe we should.
I'm excited about that.
So I want to know more about the term that I've heard some of my MFA students talk about, and I'm not sure I understand it perfectly. The dysmorphia, body dysmorphia, which is, as I understand it, is in this case you're talking. Well, why don't you talk about it? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it is a way of describing mental anguish or upset with being fixated on a part of your body that for me, a part of my body that didn't feel congruent with who I was.
I see.
Right?
Okay.
So mirrors are not always your friend.
Right.
I had not looked in a mirror.
So it's not just a matter of not liking the way you look. It's actually feeling it's wrong. It's not who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not.
Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah.
I'm overweight
My body,
or I'm
it doesn't.
underweight. It's not about that. It's about how it relates to your identity.
Yeah, and I mean,
I see.
I've talked about this pretty publicly, so I'll just go ahead and I will offer to talk about this. I had a gender confirmation surgery 2 months ago, and where the last time I liked looking at my torso, my upper torso, was when I was about 22, before my chest did not look like a chest anymore. And shirts started fitting really differently. And I started to, hold my whole anatomy differently to hide this part. So I'm now on the other side of it, and shoulders back.
Exactly.
Maybe taking a few too many selfies. I'm told it's part of the, I'm not sharing them with the world, but I'm like, yeah. So it's
great.
It's a pretty amazing thing to feel like I'm going back to that many years ago and being like, who's that number? I don't know. Like, I like what I
Your
see in
body
the mirror.
fits
I love
who you
myself.
are.
Yes.
Okay, and I like it was another language piece that I learned it's called gender confirmation or affirmation. I've heard both terms.
Yep.
Surgery, that somehow that this surgery will change me in a way that will affirm who I am. I mean, it's kind of wonderful because it's a positive descriptor instead of some of the other assumptions that might be made.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
To be in a medical setting with doctors who are using my pronoun, who just are seeing me for the first time in a way that I've wanted for 40 years, going into doctor's offices.
And we should mention too that
Wow. That
it's at the University of Michigan. There is a what's it called? Gender
comprehensive
the
gender
whole-
services.
Yeah.
And what they're able to do is, it's extensive. You have to have a letter from a medical professional, and you get into this program, and you have access to doctors who really understand how to treat the whole of a gender non-binary transgender person,
So
which
it's
are two descriptors that I use.
I think it says a
Okay.
lot that, you know, the U of M has created a whole department
They're amazing.
to honor and work with these new realities. I mean, that's pretty.
Absolutely.
And they're doing the
significant.
research. They're doing this longitudinal study on the positive outcomes that are coming, you know, from a cohort well before me and from the cohorts after me, and it's pretty cool because a lot of what's happening is, you know, in the macro social political realm is this attempt at erasure
Yes.
of transgender people, this invisibilizing, this, you know, removing boxes on the census, and that's a whole other thing, but so to be part of a study that says, no, these are people who exist, and here are the positive outcomes. Here's how they rated on how they felt that they engaged with their, you know, close family
Right. All
partners.
of the key data that they're collecting is sociological in nature. They're talking about how people feel about themselves, how people feel in their family, how people feel at work. And it turns out everyone feels better when they've been seen by a medical professional who gets it. You know, when they've been witnessed by a medical professional who can help them navigate the system to be more supported for who they are. You know, who doesn't want that? You know, it is a beautiful thing.
Would you share with our viewers, because there may be people out there who are interested in this, what is the name of the department at U of M that's doing this work?
It's the Comprehensive Gender Services.
Okay.
You can just search U of
At U
M
of M.
Gender Services, and it'll get you there.
It's pretty
Yeah.
amazing.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was the first time we met with Jonny's endocrinologist. It was amazing. She didn't miss a beat. She was just like, so, how are you doing? What are your goals? You know, it was just so neat. We didn't have to do any educating. She was up to speed on everything. She even had some data for us that was new, and it was just like, it's so neat to get that kind of medical attention instead of like, okay, so you're gonna have to help me come up to speed on some, you know, like, which is kind of how it
Or
can
we can
be.
change you. We can actually fix you so that you don't want to do this.
Which is actually, in some ways, Jonny's experience of the medical, you know,
Yeah.
for decades.
with some therapy, we can fix you so that you
Yeah. Or with hormones, we can fix you in
Right.
this other way because your body's doing these things. And I mean, and again, this is like the fine line of like where transgender people end up talking about, you know, their physiology, about their anatomy, a very private, you know, thing. We are a lot more up for grabs. We're a curiosity. We're, you know, so when I'm saying gender confirmation surgery, I know that folks are like, oh, what kind of surgery? And for whatever reason, the default is to a place that is the most private and something that we never ask of when I meet my new friend so-and-so of the female variety, well, I wonder what kind of parts are in, you know, we don't do that. And so it's really interesting, and it's a fine line for folks who need to have services that are outside of the gender binary, for people to who, you know, to get services. I don't know. I kind of got lost in my thoughts there. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
probably it says wonderful to be affirmed as to actually get the services. I mean, to start out with somebody who gets it.
Yep.
I mean, that's phenomenal. And how, I mean, it's probably not available yet in Traverse City, but Ann Arbor's pretty
It is. That's
remarkable just that it's that close. And
Although I think there are more and more medical professionals here who are open to that and open to the discussion. I hope so. But I think one of the other things that you are saying is that in at least in initial conversations with new friends, we don't talk about body parts. You know, we just don't, except because of that language, everybody's curiosity gets turned on high alert, and some people don't have any filters for that. Is that right?
Yes.
And so it's a breach of privacy.
It
Yes.
is.
Enormously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I get that.
being who you are, though, I think you can negotiate that courteously. I mean, you're not
Yeah.
going to say what you probably would like to say sometimes, but you can gently say, you know, probably I don't need to answer those questions, but thank you for
So there,
affirming who I am.
So
Thank
what
you
I'm-
for your
what-
concern and interest
yeah.
in my genitals, but
I mean,
unless you want to
they're
talk
mine.
about yours.
but this is interesting information because I think a lot of people are truly curious and don't know that there are social mores around that they
Yes.
should be
Yeah.
attending to in the same way that courtesy would demand of anybody. So I think there is that.
Can we?
Yeah, there's so much to say.
I know. We're already
But we want to go back
going-
to
I want to have Jonny and Elon too actually talk about the pronoun they, because
Yes.
you had referenced it in the introduction.
Yes.
And when I met informally to have coffee with Elon, and she was talking about they and them so easily, and each time I would be playing catch up. Oh, she's talking about Jonny, because I'm not quite there yet, you know, in terms of using the pronoun they and them.
we're trying.
Yeah, I'm perfectly open to it. I don't live with you, so I don't have to
Yeah.
get up to speed quite as fast. But,
Yeah.
but talk about why that's useful and helpful, and why tell us.
Yeah.
I took this cue from the younger generation. This pronoun of they, because she has been was increasingly like nails on a chalkboard for me. And when service people would come up to the table and be like, "Ladies,
How are you
Elon,
girls doing today?"
it
like,
was increasingly
That
like,
even makes me cringe.
Exactly.
So I have had a couple of friends over the last many years use they as a pronoun, and I asked one of them if I could talk with them about it, and at the end of the conversation I was like, that feels like me, and this is why. I show up in any, like, on the spectrum, right? I show up in different ways at times. And this indwelling of both masculine and feminine is something that, that's what makes me. That's what makes up Jonny at this moment in time. And I am grateful for what I think of as the divine feminine. This is that I have coursing through me, that was sourced, because we all are born female, all of us, until hormones start taking effect in utero and beyond. So
The default setting of the zygote is female. We're not born female, but yeah.
I've got the medical anatomist here. So yeah, they started to feel the best for me, because I didn't necessarily, folks, I don't mind being he'd and himmed. I've got a mustache now, my voice is deeper. There are things that I understand that's just how I'm going to be addressed at times. And that feels right for me. They feels the most right, because because I honor that in me. That's how I feel. And it's different for every one of us.
Yeah.
And everyone who's trying makes mistakes. That's part of the deal. Is we're all working to be better humans with each other. And the thing that I always say for people who are struggling with the grammatical part of it is, look, if the Oxford English Dictionary, which has never been a bastion of liberalism when it comes to language, can adopt they and them as appropriate pronouns for people who identify as non-binary, transgender, gender non-conforming, then we can do that too. We're not replacing the period. We're not, taking away the comma. We're not making everyone use semicolons appropriately. We're just asking for a pronoun that fits humans that haven't felt served by our language. And I think that's a really powerful thing. We're at a really powerful time, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to kind of change our language to fit more people.
Yeah.
And it raises your consciousness. And
Yes.
Anne Marie and I were remembering how we tried to do that during the women's movement. You know, to stop saying we're going to man that booth, we're going to staff that booth, and to all the ways
Yeah.
in which man was the dominant word, and and power structure. We're not there yet. We're still in that transition. It's a lot better than it was. So it makes you appreciate that it takes time. Not everybody's going to embrace they as quickly as you would prefer.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it, and it's a thing that
It takes practice.
it takes
Yeah.
it
does.
it
I mean,
absolutely does.
You know, I have to think about it myself often.
It's a mindfulness practice, and
Yeah.
it requires just a slowing down and a seeing and being with the person.
That's important, isn't it?
It
You know,
is.
that making that transition to the more inclusive language is a way of actually seeing someone.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I think
mean,
that's lovely.
Going through this with my mom, who's, you know, in her early 70s.
Yeah.
And I've been little baby Jennifer, you
Yeah.
know, and so when I watch her kind of get into nostalgia land and like tell stories, and there's this sort of, she's not necessarily present with me,
Right.
but reporting on me, then that's when the slips happen. And I have a lot of grace with her. I know I don't expect, let us all be free from perfectionism is the thing that, like, if I could tell you how many people are like, I'm just going to get it wrong. I'm just going to get it wrong. And it's like, you are going to get it wrong. We all get things wrong. It's the trying.
To
and
make the real
seeing.
attempt. Yeah. Make the real
And
attempt.
to listen, I mean, and I want you to say a couple of things when you and I talked about how, and this was before your surgery, but that even when you were taking some hormones and how you began to feel more like you.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm seeing, you know, is here's a person who is comfortable with their identity in a way that seems visible and palpable to me. And
Feels great. It feels like coming home. It feels like my receptors were like, this is what I've been asking for all these years.
Wow.
This is that. I mean, I've struggled with a lot of things, depression and just sort of like malaise, and you know, and now I haven't been able to. I had ADD. I have ADD, something, and I tried all kinds of things to kind of get me present, focused, and turns out. Hormones are pretty powerful things, you know.
And it helps with that too.
My thinking.
what a fascinating theory that would be.
Wow.
Yeah. I
Wow.
feel like my cognitive function is much better. My moods are, yeah.
Okay, and I also want to hear from Elon.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm watching the clock, and somehow time's vanishing. But, you know, this has been a transition for you in more ways than one.
Right.
As a committed partnership, you're
Sure.
married.
10 years in October.
Congratulations.
Oh,
Thanks.
Yeah.
We've been together 17 years, yeah.
So what's it been like for you?
It's interesting. The little things that I notice are funny things. As someone who is raised kind of a second wave feminist, there are masculine traits that I'm like, wow, Johnny's literally never pulled something out of my hands before and been like, let me fix it. I was just like, what is happening right now? You know, like everything goes into slow motion. I'm like, what? But I really think that there's a lot of change that's just been almost invisible to me because I know this person.
Right.
And I've loved this person for a very long time. And I've had the question for both of us for a very long time, like, hey, is there maybe something on the other side of the gender door for you? You know,
That's
and
a good way to say it.
and I feel like that's something that I've known was a part of our story somewhere for a long time as well. So not a lot of this has been surprising or jarring, other than those weird little bits where I'm like, wow, testosterone really is a thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And again, being raised a second wave feminist, I always called it testosterone poisoning when I would deal with men. And so it's been really interesting to have a study of that in someone I know and love so well and so closely, and it's a fascinating transition. It's a fascinating time. And I witness over and over Jonny just becoming more and more themselves, you know, and just seeing that embodiment and that presence that's like, oh, they're really here now.
See, I love it. You're so comfortable with that plural pronoun.
Yeah.
It's
You are.
And then you
Well,
make
it's
it,
really who they are. I mean,
you
it's
make
like,
you make it make sense. You know, it really fits.
Thank you.
You did tell me a kind of, I don't know, it's not exactly humorous, but awkward moment where now sometimes you're mistaken for a heterosexual couple.
Yeah.
And what it's like to negotiate that.
I mean, I'm one of those people who am really accustomed to being underestimated. So it's kind of a delight to me when it happens. I'm sort of like, oh, this will be interesting. You know, and I leave it up to Jonny. It's not mine to tell. But I do think it's an interesting place because we encounter these assumptions all the time, right? They don't even hit us. It's just like it's the air we breathe. And so I had done so much work to become unaware of people recognizing or discovering that I was a lesbian. Just being like, yep, that's your work. I'm just going to push that emotional labor right back to you. You can do whatever you need to do. So now that it's become even more complex and interesting, I'm sort of like, okay, yeah, you solved that Rubik's Cube on your own. I can direct you to some resources, but I'm not going to do the emotional labor of unpacking what that is. And for
Nor
me,
should you have to.
right.
Right.
And
that's
for
a new idea.
It is a very new idea.
Yes. Yes.
It is a very new idea. And actually, I did a lot more unpacking of stuff because of our queerness and things like that. So it's interesting. You know, I'm definitely still a very queer identified woman. I identify as an angry lesbian. And I think that that's not going to change. I've told Jonny, I'm like, you know, if this continues to evolve and shift and you sort of feel like you're more male identified, that's fine. You'll just always be in the receiving side of my ire. Which is no different than being married, really, anyway, right?
I'm like, so same as, you know,
That's so
same as it ever was.
interesting.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. So you're bringing, I'm just going to be a little bold here, you're bringing your attitudes toward the patriarchy to this person who
Be
has,
advised.
Yeah.
yeah,
It's-
wow.
I mean, that's my work too. Like, you know,
Yeah.
I know you
Right.
mentioned that to me too, that you're
Right.
kind of noticing more about the patriarchy than you did before. And you
people,
don't like all of it.
I'm like walking down the aisle at the grocery store, and lovely, you know, women are just like, you know, like I see people
Get out of your way.
get out of my way, and I'm like,
Or
let
when
me get out of the way.
sometimes what I've witnessed is men who are kind of like, don't get out of your way. They're kind of like, oh.
It's true
So
that
posturing.
So I have so the posturing thing it's really interesting as I'm receiving this whole new data stream.
Wow.
We were traveling out west with her mom earlier this winter, and there were some places where I was like, I'm Jonny, please don't misgender me. Let's just, and it was, for me, it was a safety thing in parts where I didn't know because for whatever reason, this one version of masculinity, the hyper-masculine, seems to actually be so fragile that my passing through space as male, but to be discovered would really upset them in ways that I would be the object of violence.
Yeah, or aggression. Yeah.
And that's the hypervigilance that trans people live with every day. We go through spaces and are like, is this safe? Am I going to pass? Can I be just me? You know, and
Wow.
makes you want to take a lot of naps. You know, it really does.
Yeah.
Well, and I
It's a
think
kinder response. Than
there's a really interesting thing that is part of the transgender movement, if you will, that's some trans men, specifically Tom McVie. So sorry. Thomas Page McVie was talking about that trans men are proving that toxic masculinity is a choice.
Ah, I like that.
And it's such a whoa, it just undid a whole like segment of the chokehold that the gender binary has on us culturally. And I think it's such an interesting concept. It's such an interesting perspective to say trans men actually prove that toxic masculinity is a choice.
So I'm going to have to wrap this up here.
Of course.
But this is so
It's so
fascinating,
rich.
you know. Yeah.
But it's a great place to wrap up, because what this suggests to me is that not only is your courage in making these changes good for you, it's good for all of us. It's like you're opening up doors for all of us to be more fully who we are, not only by embracing you, but by being ourselves. And I think we have a lot to explore in that domain.
Yeah. And I just want to say thank you for your
For your
courage.
courage
I
in
mean,
sharing.
it's and being so open and willing, even though it must be a burden after a while to have people like us say, okay, we need to be educated, you know. but I think I just want you to know how grateful we are to open that conversation, to reduce the dark energy around the language.
Yes.
And to give us a means to choose the words that will help us be friends.
Yeah.
And then maybe
Yeah.
in 3 or 4 years you'll come back again and we'll find out where
Who knows
we are.
what?
Yeah.
There will be some
would
new
be great.
discovery of identity that we'll be traversing.
Maybe for us too.
That's right.
We'll see. Thank
May we
you.
all
you.
be
Y'all are a
freer.
delight.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
having us. It's such an honor.
And we'll be right back with Ideas Live.
Hello and welcome back to Ideas Live. This is the wrap-up segment of our program. And we've just been talking about issues related to transgender people. This has been quite a conversation.
Oh my gosh, my head is full of ideas and insights, and I'm just so grateful for Elon and Jonny for coming on and being willing to talk to us about it. What were your takeaways in this moment?
I think we're really fortunate, you and me, but we as a community, that they're brave enough and kind enough
Yes.
to kind of share their story and help us grow into these new awarenesses,
Yes.
into the new languages, to the whole idea that gender is a continuum.
Yes.
I mean, that to me is one of the major takeaways. It's not male, female, gay, lesbian, this, either or. It's not either or. It can be all of these things, and it evolves over time.
Yes, and it evolves over time. I think that's really important. I also like there was the attitude that yes, that they brought to the table, that yes, we're willing to talk, we're willing to share, but the change is on you. The change is our responsibility to begin wrapping our attitudes in our minds around a new definition of gender. And I think that's a really helpful thing. It's not up to you, it's up to me to I can seek to be informed, but I need to think, I need to make these transitions myself in terms of my attitudes and and I think that's just really both beautiful and challenging.
It really is.
And it's interesting. There are other things. I love the conversation, about language, of course, and what
Yes.
the language means. And I thought that was rich and helpful. And the more we practice, I think the easier it gets for us to negotiate these terms, which are also, as they pointed out, somewhat fluid.
Yes, right.
The terms are shifting and changing as new attitudes are explored, and it seems to me that gender identity at some point might just become passé. It might just be like,
Oh, well.
don't worry about it. Whatever.
And
It's what we are. Whatever we are as people. I mean, Elon said that, or Jonny said that several times. It's about people.
It starts with a person.
Yeah.
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 And it seems to me, too, that it's becoming more inclusive. I mean, that we're all part of
Yeah.
the same family, and we have different takes on it.
Yeah.
And maybe those takes even are evolving. And it's not so scary. It's
Yeah.
because I'm still just a person.
Right. And yet, if you are not if in your deep personal self you are not aligned with your identity, then that is,
yes.
that's an issue. So, what a fascinating conversation.
We need to come back to it.
Yes, and I think we will. But for now, let's just say this is a world opening.
It is for all of us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us.